Welcome back to the Buddhist Audio Bookshelf YouTube channel. Today, we delve further into the wisdom of meditation by Thanissaro Bhikkhu, also known as Geoffrey DeGraff. We deeply appreciate your support. Please take a moment to like and share this audiobook, helping us expand its reach and granting more individuals access to its profound insights. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for instant notifications when new content is released. Together, we can disseminate the teachings of meditation and mindfulness, fostering a community dedicated to enlightenment and inner peace. Your participation in our mission to make these transformative teachings universally accessible is truly invaluable. Let's begin today's reading. The Governing Principle. May 5, 2014. In the passage where the Buddha describes the different functions of the qualities you want to bring to the path, he describes mindfulness as the governing principle. In another passage, he explains what that means. Essentially, when you see that there's a good quality that hasn't arisen within you yet, you're mindful to give rise to it. Once you've given rise to it, you try to maintain it. That's what mindfulness does, so keep that in mind. This is the exact opposite of what you often hear. That mindfulness simply watches things arising and passing away without interfering. But here its duty is to remind you. You've got to give rise to skillful qualities in the mind. And once you've got something skillful, you want to maintain it, too. Try to make sure that it doesn't pass away. So always keep this in mind as you're practicing, because the teachings that tell you otherwise are all over the place. When we were trying to ND a good translation for mindfulness of breathing in French, a French Buddhologist objected to the rendering that corresponded to keeping the breath in mind on the grounds that to say that you could keep something in mind is to say that things could actually last, that you could actually conserve them and keep them going, whereas everything arises and passes away momentarily. That statement is a real misunderstanding of the teaching on inconstancy. Your duty with regard to the Four Noble Truths is to comprehend suffering, abandon its cause, realize its cessation, and develop the path. To develop means that you give rise to it, and once it's there, you keep it going. That's the function of desire and right-eared as well. The desire to abandon unskillful qualities, to develop qualities that are skillful, and once you've got them there, to keep them going and to keep developing them so that they get better and better. This may seem to be ting against inconstancy, stress, and not self, and that's precisely what it is. We're trying to create a state of mind that lasts, that's easeful, and that's under your control to see how far you can go in that direction. This requires a special set of skills. You want to maintain the good things you've got, and that means recognizing them for what they are. In the very beginning, concentration comes in little tiny pieces, moments of stillness, moments of clarity, moments of ease. You want to learn how to recognize them, even as you're just working with each in and out breath. Where in the breath is it comfortable? Where is it not? Can you smooth out the uncomfortable parts while maintaining the comfortable ones and learning how to appreciate them? That's one of the functions of the teaching on emptiness. When you realize that your mind has settled down to a certain extent, you realize that it's empty of a lot of the burdens and troubles it had before. The Buddha makes a comparison with leaving a village and going into the wilderness. You sit down in the wilderness and you realize all the hustle and bustle of life in the village is not there. The concerns about people, the concerns about your belongings, are not there. There's just the lesser disturbance that comes from being in the wilderness and perceiving it as wilderness. Then you learn how to drop that perception because, after all, the perception of wilderness contains perceptions of dangers. So you drop the perception of wilderness and just think about earth. Everything that's there is just earth, the earth in your body, the earth and trees around you, the land around you. Even if there were an animal that would come and eat you, that would be earth, too, just earth eating earth. When you think in those terms, there's a lot less to get concerned about, because, after all, it's not eating you, it's eating the body. But you don't even think about those details, you just think about the earthness of everything. That's an even more rened state. The Buddha recommends that before you try to move on from that, you learn to appreciate it. Notice that there's a lessening of the burden of stress, there's a greater sense of openness, and indulge in that, delight in that, because this is what gives energy to your path. So as you're focusing on the breath here, keep the same principle in mind. Whatever ease there is, appreciate that, cupping it in your hands, protecting it. It may just be one spot in the body to begin with, but think of it as like a small reed that you try to light in the midst of a windy plain. You've got to use your hands to cup whatever little aim you've got to protect it from the wind. There will come a point when the reed is strong enough that you don't have to cup it quite so closely. You can pull back a bit, but you still have to do what you can to protect it, because the wind is blowing. It's an open plain. So you put up a piece of metal or a piece of wood or something to shelter the aim. You keep looking after it. This principle of maintaining is very important because it's only when you maintain concentration that it can really develop into a strength. So you always try to keep this in mind. Take that sense of well-being and do what you can to keep it going. This is where Ajahn Lee recommends that, when you're evaluating the breath, you not only look at where it's comfortable and adjust it to make it comfortable, but then also, when it is comfortable, you try and get some use out of it, because that amplifies the sense of well-being, at the same time making it more solid. Think of your awareness linked the whole body. The breath energy LLS the whole body. You might ask yourself, holding the perception in mind that there should be breath energy illing the body, to notice where it's strongest, where the breath energy feels most healthy. Then notice where it's weak. Can you think of good breath spreading from the healthier spots into the weaker ones? Is there any blockage? Do the energy channels feel like they've been squeezed out? Are they pinched at the end of a breath? Then think that you can open them up and protect that sense of energy. Once you realize that it's there, hold on to it. Again. Holding on to it is not like grabbing hold of it, it's more like protecting it, cupping it in your hands. Protect it from the winds out there, because winds can come from all directions. For example, dealing with other people, you suddenly run into their energies. Or you go to certain places where the place itself has strange or unfriendly energies. You don't want them to invade your space, so you try to protect yourself, because the breath, as it oozes through the body, is like an electric current. It creates a magnetic field around the body that can act as a protection against negative energies coming in from outside. That way, even though you're dealing with occult people, you don't have to inhale their occulty, you don't have to absorb their occulty, you don't have to let it come and occupy parts of your body. You are their RST. You've got this protective shield. It's when you sense this that you realize the value of maintaining. This gives the mind a good, safe place to stay. You become more and more sensitive to what's been invading your space all along, and now you don't have to sewer from it. You've got something to help you battle against those negative energies, both within and without. So once things settle down and they feel good, try to maintain that. Now, there are times when you hit something really good and you get so excited that you drop it. It's not so much that the desire to keep it going is a bad thing. After all, that's part of right art. The trick lies in learning how to make that desire skillful, remembering that to keep it going requires certain causes that you're trying to learn, and at getting the mind in place and keeping it in place are two different things. The keeping requires a little bit less energy. It's a more consistent looking after kind of energy, a hovering around kind of energy. But it's something you've got to do continuously for it to really get the best results. So you focus the desire on looking for the causes and maintaining what causes you can. Try to be gentle with the concentration. Learn to appreciate it. Learn to treat it with care, because when you look after it, it'll do a lot of good things for you as well. It's like that story of the lion and the mouse. The lion catches the mouse and the mouse pleads with him, "Let me go, and maybe someday I'll be able to help you." The lion is so amused by the mouse's offer that he lets it go. And, of course, later on the lion is caught in a large hunter's net, and the mouse is able to come along and chew the net and free the lion. So this little bit of concentration, this little spot of being centered here in the body, if you look after it, maybe someday it'll be able to set you free. The Easy Way Out. July 28, 2015. As the Buddha said, we're all born into this world with an arrow stuck into our hearts. The arrow of suffering, greed, aversion, delusion. We all want to end a way to take the arrow out. Some of us, of course, don't realize that the arrow is there. We feel the pain, but we think that it's coming from something else. We grow up when we really realize that, okay, the arrow is here, and that we're the ones shooting ourselves. There's another discourse where the Buddha says that whenever physical pain comes, it's like one arrow being stuck in us and then we shoot ourselves with another arrow. Or actually it's more arrows than that. A whole quiver of arrows being upset about the pain. Why is this happening to me? Why is this suffering happening to me? Why can't I get rid of it right away? And all those arrows just make the problem worse. So, as he said, there is a path for the extraction of arrows, which is the Noble Eightfold Path. This, he also says, is the only path. Sometimes you look at the path and it seems long and difficult. We'd like to see a shorter path, an easier path. We'd like to end the easy way out. But this is the easy way out. If we can strip away all the complications that we add to the path, we end that it actually is an easy path. Easy for the good side of the mind. It's asking you to do things that are honorable, things that are noble, things that feel really good deep down inside when you do them. So ask yourself, what obstacles are you putting in your own way? And be patient but persistent in learning how to put them aside. The difficulty, of course, is that a lot of these obstacles are things that we identify with. I was reading a Dhamma talk by Ajahn Mahabua the other day, and he was talking about how the problem with the dilemmas is we think they're us, and the idea of removing any of those dilemmas is like cutting off an arm, taking out your liver, taking out things that you think are vital to you. An important part of the skill of the meditation is learning to see them as something separate, that they really aren't you. You don't really need them. So you want to develop a part of the mind that doesn't identify with them. Learn how to identify with the part that wants to be on the path and is not looking for shortcuts. Because all too often the shortcuts short-circuit everything, and the signs pointing to the shortcuts were put there by the dilemmas themselves. You've got this breath, then you've got the next breath. We can't take a short. As a result, it doesn't get anywhere new. After all, this is a path that not only takes out the arrows in the heart, but also helps you to realize things you haven't yet realized, to see and experience things you haven't yet seen or experienced, to attain something you've never attained before. It takes you to someplace that's really special. So sometimes it requires learning some patience, other times it requires learning persistence. All the unglamorous but good qualities of the mind get to play their role like the house elves in Harry Potter. They're not very glamorous, they seem to be very minor. But it turns out that they're essential to the plot. The same with patience, persistence. Sticking with this breath and then this breath. And, oh, here comes another breath. Well, stick with that one, too. And then, here's another one. There may not be that much difference among them, but if you stay with them, you begin to see that there are differences. And this is an important element in learning how to develop your own discernment. You can take other people's beautiful concepts. Emptiness sounds wonderful, oneness sounds wonderful, interconnectedness all sounds wonderful, but they're just words, ideas, perceptions. You've got to learn how to question perceptions as part of the practice, and you need to develop your own sensitivity if you're going to see things as they're actually happening. That means looking at things that may not seem all that different to begin with, but then as you get used to them you can see, oh, this is different. This breath was different from that one. This mind state is different from that one. You want to be able to see when there's more stress in the mind. Okay. What did you just do? Sometimes what you just did was a very subtle thing. This is why the path is gradual. The Buddha's analogy is of the continental shelf of India. It gradually slopes downward, and then now there's a sudden drop. The sudden drop happens because the deathless is always there. What makes the process gradual, though, is the fact that your ability to discern these things can develop only gradually with patience, with practice, as your sensitivities develop. We tend to think of wisdom as concepts, but it's actually a matter of sensitivity, noticing when something has happened, noticing when something has been different, seeing minor distinctions. What's the difference between a desire that's part of the path and a desire that's a cause of suffering? You can probably describe it in words if you've been reading the texts, but actually to see it acting in the mind, that's a different matter entirely. And so the purpose of this practice is to make you more sensitive. When the Buddha describes the steps of breath meditation in all the different tetrads, that's basically what it is. Training in sensitivity. First you sensitize yourself to a particular aspect of your experience. Then you ask, to what extent are you fabricating this element of your experience? Then you try to notice, when you're fabricating that aspect, such as with the breath or with feelings, or with your mind states, which ways of fabricating are more stressful, and which ones are less. Which ones add a burden to the mind and which ones take a burden away. Then you calm down the fabrication to move in a direction of less and less stress. It's sensitivity training. You're becoming sensitive to the actions in your mind. Things you've been living with all along but you don't really see clearly because you've been looking at them in another way or just looking past them, looking through them. These events that come up in the mind, they're like signs, anger pointing someplace. And for most of us, when we see the anger pointing, we look in the direction the anger's pointing. But as we meditate, we're learning to turn around and look directly at the anger. What is that anger? Who's pointing? Why? And is it good to follow the anger or not? These are things you need to learn how to perceive for yourself. The instructions are there and they're all complete. You can't look for any hidden teachings that would make them easier. The Buddha laid everything out as clearly as possible and as simply as possible. This is the easy way out. Just make sure that you don't add any unnecessary complications. The Sport of Wise People. June 19, 2015. Ajahn Fuang once called concentration practice the sport of wise people. Like any sport, it's something you want to do well, but you also want to enjoy yourself while you're doing it. So you've got to find that right balance between sticking with it, mastering the technique, and having some fun in the process. Otherwise it gets grim and serious. Of course, our purpose is serious, the practice is serious, we're dealing with a big problem, the problem of suffering, but if you're grim about the path, that grimness begins to grind you down. So you have to learn how to develop a light attitude around what you're doing. One of the skills of meditation is learning how to gladden the mind as you're practicing. So, what would gladden your mind right now? Maybe some thoughts of goodwill. Try to think of someone you've never extended goodwill to before and spread goodwill to that person. You might want to choose someone a little bit challenging and take it as you take a challenge in any sport. Here's a problem, here's a difficulty, but there must be a way around it, and you're going to end it. This is one of the hallmarks of people who are not just good at a particular sport, but really good. Once they've mastered one problem, they go out where the next problem is, and the next, and they take joy in posing questions and learning how to answer them. Once you spread thoughts of goodwill, the next question is, how are you going to stay with the breath? Where would be a fun place to focus on the breath right now? Some place you haven't thought of before, something new, something different. Ajahn Fuang would sometimes talk about thinking of a pole of light inside the body, extending down from the middle of the head, down through the spine. As you breathe in, think of the breath coming in from all directions into that pole of light, and as you breathe out, think of it going out in all directions from that pole of light. This way, you're not staying with just one spot. You've got a line in the body for your focus. Another time I heard him talking about breathing into your bones. Think of all the bones in the body, and the breath energy going into the marrow. What this means is that you've got to ventilate the mind a little bit. Otherwise, it gets stagnant like the huts here when they're closed during the heat of the day. I've been going into the empty huts and opening them up in the evening, and they're really stewy because there's no circulation at all. Sometimes the temperature inside is actually cooler than the temperature outside, but because nothing is moving, because there's no ventilation, it feels hotter. And the mind can be that way, too. If you've got a particular idea about the meditation in mind and you just hold to it, and don't have any opportunities for changing things a little bit, it gets too a. So think of things that will gladden the mind, things that will bring some novelty to your meditation, and that way you give yourself some staying power. Also, think about things you're carrying in from the day or carrying in from other aspects of your life. Can you let go of them? A lot of things we hold on to as being really important in life. We deny ourselves around them, but if we can't let them go at all, it's like having a muscle that's tensed up all the time. So think of something you tell yourself would be impossible to let go of, and then see if you can put it down for right now. Think the opposite thought. Like that character in Through the Looking Glass, who said he liked to think about 3 or 4 impossible things every morning before breakfast. Think of something that would be ordinarily impossible for you to let go of, something you would deny yourself around, and see if you can undeny yourself, at least for the time being. After all, everything you're holding in mind right now, you'll have to let go of at some point. All of your perceptions, all of your ideas. When the time comes to leave the body, you're going to have to leave a lot of those behind as well, and it's good to get practice in letting go, because the path requires staying power, and the trick to staying power lies in letting go of things that are really unnecessary. It's like going camping. If you want to hike for a long time, you take a light burden. The lighter the burden, the longer you can hike. But most of us have too many things in our knapsack. We're afraid we're going to miss this little convenience or that. We've got to hold on to this, hold on to that, and as a result we hardly get away from the trailhead at all. So with any distraction that comes up in the meditation, just say, let go, let go, let go. You hold on to the breath, or whatever you've taken as your object, and just say to yourself, that's it, that's all I'm going to hold on to. And have a light attitude toward it. As Ajahn Fuang would say, you play with the meditation. But you don't play in a desultory or scatterbrained way. You play in the same way that a professional sportsperson would play. At a sport you keep at it, keep at it, keep at it, but ND ways of making it interesting, ways of making it challenging, and learn how to encourage yourself to be up for the challenge, to enjoy the challenges. This is what gives you staying power. I've been working on a project having to do with humor in the Pali Canon. There are 2 basic ways it's used. One is to let go of the values of the world, to encourage you not to be impressed by things that people in the world are generally impressed by, such as the fact that there are divas out there. There are some people who think, wow, if I get to talk to a diva, I must be really special. The diva might give me important information. Well, the Buddha has you question that by pointing out in a humorous way that there are a lot of divas who don't really know very much. Or you might think that people who are rich and wealthy and powerful have something that'd be worth aspiring to. Well, you look at the lives of the kings in the time of the Buddha. For all their power, they had a lot of the problems that everybody else has. Nothing special there. In fact, they have a lot of problems that ordinary people don't have. People who want a share of their power will feel no compunction about lying to them. So use the discernment of humor to give yourself a sense of distance from the values of the world. You can step back and realize, I'm not enmeshed in those things, I don't have to be enmeshed in those things, those are things that I don't have to believe in or be impressed by, and there's a lightness that comes from that. The other use of humor is to look at the practice as something enjoyable. There's a really nice image of a bull elephant who's tired of being in a herd of elephants. When he goes down to bathe, all the other elephants bump up against him. He tries to drink clear water, but all the elephants have muddied the water. So he goes alone and bathes without anybody bumping into him. When he drinks water, it's clear. Whenever he itches anywhere, he takes a branch of a tree and scratches himself with it. And the Buddha interprets this image as being like a person who's going to meditate. You use your concentration to scratch wherever you feel an itch. So, where does your mind itch right now? Where does your body itch right now? Can you use the breath to scratch it? Can you use whatever your concentration topic is to scratch it? The image is nice and light-hearted, and so even though we're serious about the practice and, as I say, we're dealing with a serious problem, the sewering in the mind, we want to have a light touch. Otherwise things get bogged down. I think I've told you about the Englishman who walked across the Northwest Territories way back in the 1820s, the RST recorded instance of an English person entrusting his life to a band of Deen. As they were going across the land, of course, they were hunting. On some days they'd catch some game and on other days they wouldn't. On the days when they couldn't catch game, he said, they tightened up their belts and spent their time joking with one another as they walked along, to keep up their spirits. Otherwise, you start focusing on how hungry you are, and you get more and more miserable, and the trail seems more and more impossible. But if you can keep a light spirit about things, a long trail becomes shorter, and a heavy load becomes light. So do what you can to keep your spirits up and to enjoy the meditation as a game. Building a home for the mind. November 25, 2015. The texts often talk about concentration as being a home for the mind, Vihara Dhamma, the place where the mind can settle in. Before you can settle in, though, you have to build a house. And as Ajahn Lee said, the work in building this house lies in the directed thought and evaluation. You ND a topic that you like to think about, and then you evaluate it here in the present moment. For example, with the breath, you've got all kinds of in and out breathing that you can focus on. Long, short, heavy, light, deep, shallow, fast, slow. Or you can start with the breath energies in the body. Some people, in the beginning, ND them easier to focus on than the in and out breath. Just scan through the body. Notice where there's any tension or tightness. Think of it relaxing. And then move on until you've been through the body several times. As you do that for a while, you'll ND that the in and out breathing will ND its own rhythm that's just right for the needs of the body. The important point is that you're focused on the sensations in the present moment. That's what you're thinking about and that's what you're evaluating. It's not that you're thinking about something someplace else or analyzing things in abstract terms. You're asking very practical questions, focused on what you're doing. How does this feel? Is this a place where you can settle in? How's the living room? How's the dining room? Is it big enough? Or do you feel cramped or tight? You've got to expand the house. Think not only of the body, but also of the area immediately around the body. Can you sense an energy out there? Some people can, some people can't. If you can, how do you make use of it? That's a lot of what the evaluation is about. It's like looking at the lumber and the other things you've got for the house. What can you make with this lumber? You may have had one house in mind, but when you actually get your materials, you see they're not quite what you expected. Well, make the best of what you've got. You'll ND that there are some parts of the body where the energy is hard to work with. Well, work around them. If there's a blockage someplace, think that the breath can go right through it. If there's a pain in one part of the body and the more you focus on it, the worse it seems to get, ask yourself, what is my perception adding to the pain? Can I think about the pain using other perceptions? So the evaluation here evaluates the breath and other physical aspects of the body, together with what you're doing, in terms of your perceptions and thoughts, to see what can be changed. One perception game that I've found useful is that, if you feel that there's a pain in your back, ask yourself, suppose that pain was actually a pain in the front of the body, and I'm misperceiving it? And hold the perception in mind that it's actually a pain in the front. Or if the pain is in the front, see if you can perceive it as being in the back. You'll ND that the energies in the body move around. Sometimes even your posture will change a bit. The pain will change. And you've learned something about the power of perception. You've learned something about how you relate to the body, how your awareness relates to the body. And you begin to realize there's a lot to explore in the present moment. Someone asked me the other day what I found interesting in the breath. And I said, there's just so much to explore in the area of how your awareness relates to this physical body here. How is it that it can move the body? Why is it that your perceptions change the way you sense the body? How does this all work? If you're interested in these questions, and how can you not be interested? The breath is the ideal interface for watching the relationship between body and mind. When you can explore things in these terms, you've won half the battle right there, because then the house won't be just a nice place where you rest before you go looking for entertainment outside. There's a lot of entertainment in the house, educational entertainment, because it's not just a house of lumber and shingles. It's a home of your awareness in this body. You've taken up residence in this body. You've been with it for a long time. So what's actually going on here with this relationship? There's plenty to study. There are the different elements or properties. Earth, water, wind, breath, of course, is part of the wind element. On cold days like this, it's good to have something warm inside. Well, where are the warm parts of the body, or the parts that are warmer than others? Think about those. Evaluate those. In other words, see how you can integrate them with the breath and spread the warmth around the body. When this kind of evaluation becomes too tiring for you, let yourself rest. You work at building the house, but you can't work 24/7, so rest in what you've got. A corner of a room that you're able to make comfortable, even though the rest of the house is unnichted. Convince yourself that it's good enough for you to stay here for a while. Someone was telling us about a meditation teacher who'd get into different levels of concentration, but wouldn't stay there very long because, although they were pleasant at RST, they wouldn't stay pleasant for more than a few minutes. That's not right concentration. Right concentration has to be a place where you can settle down and stay in comfort for long periods of time. So evaluate things. Check to see, is the amount of pressure you're putting on the breath something you could apply comfortably for a long period of time, or are you pushing too much? If it's too much, okay, back out a bit. Try to end out what's just right that can stay just right, something you can stick with for long periods of time. It's not that you're going to push and then break through to something. You simply stay and learn how to be balanced right here. When things are in balance, they open up. They don't open up when you push them too hard. The more precise your awareness of what's going on, the more precise your sensitivity to what's going on, then the more solid and balanced the breath becomes, and the more solid and balanced your concentration. So we're evaluating the breath and evaluating the way the mind relates to the breath. When a sense of pleasure does come, you evaluate what to do with it. How do you spread it without ruining it? If you push on it to spread it around, that's not going to be pleasant anymore. Pleasure has to radiate, to glow. Sometimes it'll allow, but you can't push it. All you can do is open up the different channels of energy, or the spots where things are tight and blocked, and see what happens. This is how you can develop a place where you can settle in and stay. And when the work is done, you can put aside the directed thought and evaluation, and rest comfortably in deeper levels of concentration, because the whole body has been worked through and cleaned out. It's as if directed thought and evaluation are sweeping through the body, getting rid of all the cobwebs, getting rid of all the dust, throwing out the junk that clutters your way. When those things are gone, you can settle in and become one with the breath. Unification of awareness, as the Buddha calls it. There's a sense of ow, and there's no sense that you have to direct it or that the ow is going to stop. It just ows, and you're right there. The Buddha's image is of a lake that's fed by a spring welling up. One of the Thai Ajahns called it still owing water. The mind is still, but there's a sense of ow in the body. And you allow that to mature. You settle in. The next step in making your home more comfortable is to use a little bit of directed thought and evaluation to take you to deeper and deeper levels of concentration. You settle into one level, and then you back up a bit to see where there's still some disturbance on that level. It's like a dog getting ready to lie down to sleep. It lies down and then feels a root or a stone that's getting in the way. So it gets up, circles around and NDS it, scratches it away, and then lies down with an even greater sense of ease. You don't have to count the levels of concentration you go through. Just start asking yourself these questions. Where's the disturbance in here? What's causing it? Can I drop the cause? This is what the work is all about. Settling in and then realizing, okay, it's not quite right. Back up a little bit, check things out, evaluate a little bit. You can sense what's wrong. Okay, X that. And then settle in again. And if you don't see anything wrong, stay right there. Let the mind gain a sense of ease, gain a sense of well-being from settling in. As the Buddha said, you want to indulge in the sense of well-being because it's nourishing for the mind. Ajahn Fuang called it the lubricant of our practice. It keeps things owing, keeps things running smoothly, without a lot of friction. You get a greater and greater sense that you really belong here. This is a good place to be. You feel no need to move. Some people are afraid that when they get into concentration, they'll get stuck there and won't be able to get out. Actually, you can get out very easily. Concentration is one of the easiest things in the world to leave. The stuckness that they're afraid of is the fear, and it's a legitimate fear for people with addictive tendencies that they'll crave this so much that they'll get overly upset about anything that disturbs it, that they'll always keep running away to concentration without dealing with the issues of the world or their own inner issues. That can be a problem. But RST developed the concentration because those problems can be solved. The problem that can't be solved is if you're afraid to do the concentration and don't do it, or if you're afraid to settle in, or if you're afraid to stay. Right concentration has to involve finding a place where you can stay for long periods of time, because there are a lot of issues in the mind that you won't be able to understand unless you watch them steadily, continuously for long stretches of time. As we deal with the troublemakers in the mind, the dilemmas and other unskillful qualities, you have to be alert to their tricks. And only a very steady gaze can see through some of those tricks. So this is what you need. Find an object that you can stay with. And if it's not quite right, evaluate it and adjust it so that it becomes right, something you can stay with for long periods of time without a lot of in and out, in and out. It's like riding in a car. If the driver's foot isn't steady on the accelerator, it goes up and down, and the ride is jerky. You want a smooth ride so that you can read in the car. You want to be able to settle in so that you can stay steadily here and read your own mind. And as for whatever level of jhana it might be, you can put those questions aside. Right concentration is not focused on jhana. It's focused on an object like the breath. The quality of the concentration, the jhana itself, comes from being really settled and doing your proper concentration work with the breath and your perceptions, so that you can settle in with the breath even more. You want a quality of awareness that allows you to be steady and to watch steadily things that are very subtle, to see how they're connected. This connection may take a while to detect, to understand. So, try to get into a state that can stay steadily here. If you can do the work you need to do, it'll go further than concentration and lead you to something that's even more solid and even greater refuge than your little home of concentration. Think of concentration as a little shack that you build on the side of the path. It's not your ultimate home, but you build it well because you're going to be on the path for a while. And the act of building and furnishing the home will teach you lessons about the mind. Your sensitivities will improve. Your standards as to what counts as pleasure will get heightened. While the home allows you to rest, the act of building the home will spark the insights that can take you where you ultimately want to go. The Thread of Mindfulness. April 13, 2015. The Buddha speaks of concentration as a perception attainment through all the levels from the RST jhana up through the dimension of nothingness. In each case, the perception you hold in mind keeps you in concentration, which means that as we're concentrating, we're ting against the passage we chanted just now about perceptions being inconstant. Concentration itself, of course, is inconstant, but that doesn't mean you just give it up and throw it away. It's a fabrication, but it's a path fabrication, just like all the other factors of the path. It's something you've got to foster, something you've got to develop. You're mindful to give rise to it, and you're mindful to keep it going. When the Buddha talks about mindfulness as a governing principle in the practice, that's what he's referring to. You remember to keep good things going. You don't just watch things coming and going and leave them at that. You realize that there are some things you want to give rise to, other things you want to keep going, and others you want to prevent. So in this case, as we're settling down, you want to keep the perception of the breath going. You can test different perceptions of the breath to see which ones are most conducive to settling down right now. The breath is owing through the whole body, the breath is little lines going through the body. Coming in and out of the pores, whatever perception allows you to settle in with the breath with a sense of ease. And you notice that the perception you apply to the body will have an impact on how you experience the body. It's not just a matter of trying to get the most accurate picture in your mind of what the breath is already really doing. You want to keep a picture in mind that's going to be helpful in getting the mind to settle down, and then learn to stick with it. As you go through the various levels of concentration, the object gets a lot more rened. Sometimes you want to rush to the more rened levels when you're not quite ready. Say you're working with the really obvious breath sensations in the body. They support your perception. The perception may come in little blips, and then you have to remember to extend it a little bit more, and then extend it a little bit more. And in those gaps between the perceptions, the fact that you've got an obvious breath sensation right here helps with the continuity. In other words, the perception keeps you with the breath, and the breath keeps you with the perception. And in your attempt to keep the perception going, if your mindfulness isn't strong enough, then as soon as the breath begins to disappear, that little mutual help society begins to break down. The sensation of the breath is not there to remind you to keep the perception going, and you can drop it very easily. So if you find yourself moving into an area where the breath is that rened and you can't follow it, step back and allow the breath to be a little more blatant, a little more obvious, and work on this skill of just keeping the perception going, stitching one perception to another to another to another, until that thread stitching things together gets a lot stronger. Then you'll be able to stay with more rened objects all the way to the point where the breath stops. The in and out breath stops, and what you've got left is a very still eld of breath energy throughout the body. If your mindfulness is strong enough, you'll be able to stay right there, very still. As it gets even stronger, you begin to notice that the perception of the body's having a shape begins to come and go. And you can let that perception go. What you've got left is a cloud of little sensation droplets, and you begin to perceive space between all these droplets. If you can't stay with that perception, you go back to the sensation of having a body. But if you find that you don't need a very strong physical sensation to keep you with that perception of space, you'll be able to stay there. This is why you have to build up to these things by strengthening your mindfulness, your ability to remember to stay right here, because the perception is what keeps you going, and the mindfulness is what keeps the perception going, as the sensations that help to support that perception get less and less obvious. The same applies to the perception of innate consciousness and the perception of nothingness. Then, when all you have keeping you going is the perception of nothingness, the mind can reach an equilibrium where it doesn't need a perception in order to stay concentrated. You get to the state called neither perception nor non-perception, where you recognize where you are, but you don't have a name for it. That requires a lot of equilibrium. So try to take stock of where you are on this ladder of concentration. If you find yourself reaching up to a higher level and grasping at air, and there doesn't seem to be anything there, go back to where you are. Or if you can hold on to the next rung a little bit, but then find that it's getting a little slippery, go back to where you feel more solid. The burden of the concentration lies right in this act of being mindful. That's why it's so important to realize that when the Buddha was teaching mindfulness and concentration, they were meant to go together. Sometimes you hear that mindfulness is a broad, open, easeful acceptance of whatever comes up, whereas concentration is narrower, more focused, earful. In other words, two things you can't do at the same time. I was even reading a book on mindfulness, saying that basically there are two paths. The path of mindfulness on the one hand and the path of ear and concentration on the other, and they don't mix. But that's based on a misunderstanding of mindfulness. Mindfulness is the ability to keep something in mind. And you need it for concentration because that's what stitches the various perceptions together that hold your mind right here, so that you don't go wandering. In the beginning, it's like having a lot of frayed threads or dangling ends. The thread may be there, but it's not stitched to anything, or you may have little perception moments, but there's nothing stitching them together. But if you can be clear about the perception and clear about the sensations that support the perception, then even if there are a few lapses in the thread of mindfulness, the sensations support you and you're right here, right here, right here. So try to be very meticulous in threading things together, because that's what takes these little perceptions that are inconstant and turns them into something more constant. You're pushing against that characteristic of inconstancy, just like you're pushing against the characteristic of stress. Try to make things pleasant here. You're also pushing against the characteristic of not self. You try to get some control over your ability to stitch these things together into a genuine path, something that can take you someplace. But it's not going to take you out of the body. It's all going to go deeper and deeper in here, deeper into the mind. And as your mindfulness gets stronger, then you can stay with more and more subtle things and not get distracted along the way. I knew a monk once in Thailand who was reputed to have psychic powers, very strange psychic powers. He told Ajahn Fuang one time of a trip he had taken into a cave together with another monk. There was a treasure in the cave that they wanted. They'd asked permission of the devas guarding the cave, and the devas had given their permission. But as they were going through the cave, they found the skeletons of other people who had been in the cave and had tried to take things that hadn't been allowed. Sounds like an Indiana Jones kind of movie. So they got what they wanted and left. In the same way, as you're meditating here, remember that there are other things that will tempt you away. If you're not careful, you might start stitching other things aside from the breath into your mind state. But right now, that's not what you want. There may be temptations on either side, as in the cave, but you try to be straight arrow and hold to your word, in the sense that you stick with these perceptions. Just the breath, just the breath, just the breath. And that way you get through okay. Imperturbable. June 18, 2014. Before the mind can settle down, you have to do a little house cleaning, to clean up the mind, clean up the body. Cleaning up the mind is putting it in the right mood with the right attitude, so that it's ready to settle down and not pick up a lot of other issues. After all, you've got a whole hour here free to think about anything you want, and there will be a part of the mind, or many parts of the mind, that have other agendas. That's why we do the chanting. To remind you that those agendas are not of any interest right now, not of any worth. Think about things of the past. They're gone. Things in the future you don't really know what's going to happen, but you do know that the mind has to be well trained to deal well with whatever unexpected dangers may come. And it's not going to be well trained by thinking about sights, sounds, smells, tastes, tactile sensations, ideas, which is what most of our thinking tends to be about. As it says in the discourse we chanted just now, to remind ourselves. These things burn away at the mind as long as there's greed, aversion, and delusion. Until you take care of the greed, aversion, and delusion, your thoughts of past and future tend to do nothing more than add more fuel to the Then you can remind yourself with the chants on the Brahma Viharas that you do really want true happiness, a happiness that's good for everybody. So the chants are there to clean out a lot of unskillful attitudes in the mind and to get you ready to settle down as you bring your attention into the body. This is where you have to clean things out in the body a bit, because when you start focusing in on the body, the power of your focus tends to push the blood around, interrupting the flow of energy and getting very restrictive. It can be very uncomfortable. So the natural reaction is to run away, to leave the focus. You end yourself bouncing around the body quite a lot, or in the body and outside it. So once you've got the right attitude that being here is important, clean things out a little bit in the body by making sure that the energy is owing well in different parts of the body. You can make a survey. Start down at the navel and move up the front of the body, over the top of the head, down the back, down the shoulders and the arms, down through the legs, out to the tips of the toes. Try to loosen up all the areas of tightness so that you can. See how getting your awareness centered is one thing, and the ow of energy in the body is something else. They may occupy the same space, but they don't have to act each other. In particular, the movement of the mind in the center shouldn't squeeze things out. It's as if your awareness and the body are on different wavelengths that don't have to interfere with each other, like the different radio signals going through the air. First, make sure you're clearly aware of the movement of the energy in the body and that it's moving well. Then, as your awareness begins to settle down in whatever spot you've chosen, make sure that it doesn't offer any resistance to allowing that energy to move. When you can make this distinction, then it's a lot easier to settle down and just be here really solidly with a sense of genuine well-being. And then what do you do when you're here? You remind yourself that this is a place you want to stay so that you can develop a skill. The skill of staying very, very still. Even though it may not seem like anything is happening, things are happening. There are little stirrings here, and stirrings there that, if you paid attention to them, would pull you away. And you're developing the skill of not getting pulled away. There's a passage in the Vinaya where Ven Moggallana is talking to some monks and saying that when he was in what they call the imperturbable concentration, sitting by the bank of a river, he heard the elephants in the river playing and trumpeting, splashing around and crossing over the river. The monks got upset. They didn't think that if he was in that concentration he'd be able to recognize those things, so they went to complain to the Buddha. And the Buddha said, actually, there is that concentration. It wasn't quite pure, but that does count as the imperturbable concentration. Now, imperturbable concentration is pretty advanced, at least the fourth jhana, and some of the formless states. The texts say that in pure levels of the formless states, you don't experience the V-senses, whereas they don't place that condition on the four jhanas. And as Moggallana's story suggests, even with the formless states, it's still possible to hear sounds if your attainment isn't fully pure. And as in Moggallana's case, even though his attainment wasn't pure, it was good enough to get him to arahantship. So we're not trying to block out our ears here. It's simply a matter of not getting pulled away by any of the disturbances that would come up, whether they're outside or inside, physical or mental. Just think of them exploding into nothingness, whereas your mind is solidly right here. That's the quality you want, this quality of solidity. And we're trying to make the mind solid, which is different from making the body solid. Some people will indeed that as the mind settles down, it does actually stighten up the body, which is an act of focusing too strongly on the earth element. This is one of the reasons why we go through the body RST and straighten out the breath energy, so that it doesn't get unbalanced that way. It's possible, when the mind settles in, that you can't breathe. If it feels oppressive, that's a sign that you're using your awareness to squeeze the body. You don't want that. You want the awareness to settle in the same place as the body, but not to squeeze anything in the body. Let the breath come and go freely. If it wants to settle down and stop, let it stop, but don't force it to. You apply force to the mind, not to the breath. Learn how to make that distinction. It's an important one. You want the body to be light, open, but you want your mind to be solidly centered right here. Everything is focusing in here. The more you can maintain this focus and keep it solid, the greater the strength of your concentration. This comes from being able to clean things out as you remind yourself that nothing out there deserves your attention right now. You don't have any responsibilities to know anything about the world right now. You want to develop this skill of getting the mind really centered, gathering in right here in a way that allows the body to feel at ease and the mind to feel unperturbed. If you allow it to get perturbed by things coming in through the senses, the Buddha said, it's like a cow with 8 skin being attacked by ease. It's constantly a matter of this little bite here, that little bite there, all the time, coming in from all directions. Sight, sounds, smells, tastes, tactile sensations. They're all coming in all the time, all the time. And if you let them disturb you, it's like those caribou you see up in Alaska. The mosquitoes are getting them. They buck and they run all over the place, with their bodies contorted in pain. That's the mind that leaves itself open to outside stimuli. We're not trying to block them out in the sense of not being able to hear them or sense their presence. But we are blocking them out in the sense that we just don't want to pay them any attention. So if you end the mind going out to things outside, keep reminding yourself that there's nothing out there that will really nourish you. The nourishment lies in here. The problem actually lies in here. The voice that wants to go out, the impulse to go out. But if you don't look very carefully and steadily right here, you never see where the impulse comes from. You just sense its push, its movement, and you go along with it. But here we're trying to be imperturbable. Don't let yourself get fazed by anything. It's in this way that the mind develops strength. In alignment with the Buddha's teachings, we underscore the tremendous significance of sharing wisdom widely. At present, we've converted this extensive 1,000-page work into a user-friendly audio format. The responsibility to advance this noble endeavor now lies with you. Through your subscriptions, likes, and the sharing of our content, you play a pivotal role in the widespread distribution of these teachings, benefiting countless others. Let's continue the age-old tradition of knowledge dissemination and the nurturing of mindfulness for the greater good of humanity. We wholeheartedly invite you to join us in this undertaking, and together, we can effect profound and positive changes in the lives of many.